So here we are, the time has come, the final day of What the Dickens. I hope you have enjoyed this glorious 2 weeks of Dickens. Please let me know in the comments what you have thought, if you have enjoyed it. I hope you will have liked it. I hope to do more of these style things in the future. I really enjoyed doing Jane Austen back in December. I've enjoyed this. Maybe, who knows, April will bring a Bronte week. We'll have to see. But for now, it is time to tell you about my favourite Dickens novel, my favourite novel of all time. This is going to be a long video, guys. I love this book so much. It is, of course, the beautiful Our Mutual Friend. Chapter 1. On the Lookout. In these times of ours, though concerning the exact year there is no need to be precise, a boat of dirty and disreputable appearance, with 2 figures in it, floated on the Thames between Southwark Bridge, which is of iron, and London Bridge, which is of stone, as an autumn evening was closing in. Now, as you may have noticed, I've just been reading Our Mutual Friend from a rather old copy. These 2 are the 2 volumes of a first edition of Our Mutual Friend. This is not mine, it in fact belongs to my parents, because Our Mutual Friend, as well as being my favourite book, is actually also my mum's favourite book. So these are going to go back downstairs, safe on my parents' shelves, but I thought it would be a nice opportunity to show you them. As with the first editions I have, they have quite a lot of beautiful illustrations in, though my parents have had these for quite a long time. So, Our Mutual Friend. I first read Our Mutual Friend when I was 14 years old. I had actually seen a TV adaptation of it before I read the book. I'll be talking about that adaptation at the end of this video. When I was in year 9 at school, when I was 13, 14, I got into Victorian literature for the first time. I saw a TV adaptation of Jane Eyre in something like October when I was in year 9, so it would have been 13 and a half, and I loved it, so I read Jane Eyre. And then I watched a TV adaptation of North and South, and then I read North and South, and then I watched and read Pride and Prejudice, and then I saw a TV adaptation of Our Mutual Friend because my mum told me it was brilliant, and then she gave me the book to read, and I loved it. It is, as I said, my mum's favourite book, and it quickly became my favourite book of all time. I read it when I just turned 14. I'm now not that far off 23, and it is still my favourite book. I think it will always be my favourite book. And there are partly sentimental reasons for this. As I said, it's my mum's favourite book, and also it was the first Dickens book I read. And you know how much I love Dickens, so for me, the book that made me discover Dickens is always going to have a really high place in my heart. However, it's not just sentimental. Yes, I love it, and because I love it so much, and because it is my favourite book, it will probably also be my favourite book because it just is. But also, it's brilliant. It's so good. It's amazing. I still think, actually, it is one of Dickens's best books, and it is definitely my favourite. Dombey and Son gets close, but it doesn't get quite close enough. I love Our Mutual Friend so much. Let me try and explain why. So Our Mutual Friend opens with 2 figures on a boat on the River Thames. These 2 figures are a young woman named Lizzie Hexam and her father. Lizzie Hexam and her father are not very well off. Her father, Gaffer Hexam, makes his living by pulling dead bodies out of the Thames and claiming the rewards for them, often also stealing the money they have in their pockets. But he collects these dead bodies, claims the rewards, that is how he gets his living. As you can already tell, it's quite a dark, complicated book. What a brilliant premise for a novel. And at the start of the book, Gaffer Hexam pulls a body out of the Thames, and this body is identified as John Harmon. Now, John Harmon was coming back from a long time abroad to claim his fortune after the death of his father. His father had made a fortune in dust, from rubbish. He had huge garbage heaps in which he would pay people to filter through looking for jewels and things of any value. He would sell them, and that is how he would get money. As you can already tell, it's a book with a lot of really complicated, brilliant themes. But John Harmon, on his way back to England to claim the fortune of his father, seems to have been murdered, which leaves this big question hanging in the air. Who does the Harmon fortune go to? Dealing with this issue are 2 lawyers, Mortimer Lightwood and his friend Eugene Wrayburn. Now, there was also a rather interesting thing about the Harmon will. John Harmon, in order to get his father's money, would have had to marry a young woman called Bella Wilfer, who he had never ever met. As it happens, John Harmon is murdered, so he doesn't have to marry Bella Wilfer, but Bella Wilfer was obviously expecting, she knew that she was supposed to be marrying this man and would be gaining all his money and wealth. She is not from a very wealthy background, and she is suddenly denied this future that she was expecting to have. As John Harmon is dead, the money ends up going to some faithful servants of the Harmon family called Mr. and Mrs. Boffin. They are a lovely, brilliant, fascinating couple, and they are servants. Mr. Boffin has been a dustman. He can't read. He is not fit for society, as it were. But because him and his wife suddenly have all this money, they get elevated into society in this fascinating way, and suddenly everyone is interested in them because they have masses and masses of wealth. So that is the basic setup at the beginning of the novel. A massive fortune and a murdered man. You can already tell that it is going to be a brilliant book. So, things I love about Our Mutual Friend. Where do I even begin? As I said, there are the sentimental reasons, the fact that it got me into Dickens, the fact that I have read it so many times, that I wrote about it in an A-level essay, that I wrote about it in my dissertation, and although I wrote about 7 different Dickens novels in my dissertation, Our Mutual Friend definitely kind of overshadowed quite a lot of the rest. There is the fact that it's my mum's favourite book, there is the fact that I have reread it so many times, there is the fact that there are so many brilliant characters in it, there is the fact that I was shortlisted for a short story competition about Dickens after writing a short story from the perspective of Bradley Headstone, a character in Our Mutual Friend. There are just so many sentimental reasons why I love Our Mutual Friend, but there are also a lot of reasons that are not purely sentimental. For me, Our Mutual Friend represents the culmination of Dickens. It is the best Dickens can do. I love the balance it has between humour and darkness. You know, in his later novels, in Tale of Two Cities and Great Expectations, although there is some humour still, there is more darkness, and the darkness overshadows the humour. In Our Mutual Friend, that is not the case for me. There is so much humour as well as so much darkness. The social critique is at its best. It is biting and fitting. It is so brilliant. There is this character, one of the society gentlemen, called Podsnap, and there are chapters which are called Podsnappery, which are all about the kind of hypocrisy of the upper classes and the way that society behave. Those chapters are brilliant. I love the way Dickens comments on the upper classes. I love that in Our Mutual Friend there is such a wide, kind of broad range of people in society, from people who are very, very poor and are making their living literally dragging bodies from the Thames, and people who are incredibly filthily rich, and people who are acting like they're incredibly filthily rich even though they're not. I love the wide range of characters in this. There are characters that are lovable, there are characters that are horrible, and there are a lot of characters that are complicated. Everyone in Our Mutual Friend, for me, is complicated. I have mentioned several times in the last 2 weeks just how problematic Dickens's novels can be, but for me, everything that is problematic in Dickens's works is not exactly resolved in Our Mutual Friend, but at least, like, nearly resolved. It is his last completed novel, and so much of it, for me, kind of comments on and apologises for his earlier work, and it doesn't exactly make amends, but there is this sense in Our Mutual Friend that, for me, it does feel like his final novel. I know he was writing The Mystery of Edwin Drood when he died, but even though I wish he had finished The Mystery of Edwin Drood, because I think it would have been brilliant, I'm kind of happy for Our Mutual Friend to be his last finished novel, because it feels like a lot of things are closed and resolved in a way. In my Oliver Twist video, I spoke about the anti-Semitism with which Fagin is presented, and in Our Mutual Friend, we have a character who is Jewish. This character, Mr. Ryer, is inhumanly good. I mean, he's still not like necessarily a really human, realistic presentation of someone, but he is angelic. He, a bit like Tom Pinch in Martin Chuzzlewit, is another male Dickensian angel. He is this really good, kind, loving, caring man, and everyone in society is completely prejudiced against Mr. Ryer because he is a Jew. They assume that he is horrible, and he works for a man called Fascination Fledgeby who is not very nice, but everyone always assumes that things Mr. Ryer does which are kind of forced upon him by his employer are his fault because he's Jewish, and the prejudice against Mr. Ryer and the goodness Mr. Ryer is proved to have is, for me, is kind of an apology for Fagin. It's kind of Dickens realising the problems he had and the unfair representations he had of certain characters when he was younger, and that is important, that is nice. You know, one of the reasons why I love Charles Dickens so much is that I have read all of his novels and I can see him progress as a writer and as a person over them. That is wonderful. Again, I've spoken about his problematic presentation of disability, for example in The Old Curiosity Shop, and in Our Mutual Friend there are 2 characters who are disabled who both have to walk with canes. One is Silas Wegg, who had his leg amputated when he was young and walks with a wooden leg. Mr. Wegg is a villain, and the other character is Jenny Wren, who is just one of my favourite characters in all of Dickens. I might go so far as to say she might be my favourite character in all of Dickens. Jenny Wren is a young girl of somewhere between sort of 13 and 17 years of age. She's basically described as being a child in years but an adult in the way she behaves. She is a teenage girl, she is disabled, she has to walk on crutches, and she runs her own business. She is a doll's dressmaker. She works for herself, she has to deal with her alcoholic father all the time. She has had a hard life, but she is positive, she is brilliant, she is such a complicated, wonderful character. She completely stands up for herself, works for herself, wants to be independent, and despite everything she has had to go through in life, and despite all her complications and troubles, and despite her disability, she is not defined by any of that. She is defined by being hard-working and, to be honest, just awesome. There are some brilliant, brilliant bits. There is a bit where she punishes a man who has been pretty horrible to her and a few other people she knows in the most brilliant, brilliant way. She is just an incredibly sneaky but brilliant, wonderful character. And I love that Dickens goes from having a very simplistic presentation of characters with disability to having Jenny Wren, which leads us on quite nicely also to the idea of gender. I've spoken a lot about my problem with Dickens's presentation of women in his earlier novels, and in Our Mutual Friend, for me, we reach the culmination of Dickens's characterisation of everyone and his presentation both of masculinity and of femininity. We have men who are humbled, we have women who are physically strong. Lizzie Hexam is the first Dickensian character who is described as physically strong. She's also the first female Dickensian character who does work that is not women's work. A lot of female Dickens characters work, but most of them are doing kind of needlework and housework, or they are working for relatives. Lizzie Hexam works first for her father rowing the boat, but later she works to support herself, and she works in a paper mill, which for Dickens, for a woman to be working in a paper mill and still to be a heroine is a really massive thing. There's also another character called Betty Higden, who is an older woman who refuses help from anyone even though she has wealthy friends. What she wants to do is work for herself to make her own money, and Dickens describes her as a heroine. And for Dickens to present these working women in this very, very positive, impressive, empowered light is just brilliant. It makes me so utterly happy after his boring, bland women of his early novels. It just makes me so excited. Again, a bit like Little Dorrit, we have a kind of alteration of power play between men and women in a really interesting way, especially between sort of couples. Their kind of power dynamic changes between particular couples in a really interesting way, notably between Lizzie Hexam and a man who is interested in her. Yesterday I talked about how in Dombey and Son, Edith has this brilliant speech about the marriage market, and we see similar ideas come up with the character of Bella Wilfer in Our Mutual Friend. Bella Wilfer, who was originally supposed to be marrying John Harmon as part of his will, you know, she has been left to a man in a will, and that kind of has a really complicated effect on how she views the world, because she speaks about being forever the property of strangers, being bought and sold all her life, because she is a woman who was left to someone in a will. What that says about Victorian society is really, really fascinating, and the way that Bella reflects about that and the way Dickens talks about that is just brilliant. For me, everything that has been problematic in all of Dickens's books is kind of, I can forgive it because of Our Mutual Friend. Other things I love about Our Mutual Friend: so many characters. The characters in Our Mutual Friend are so complicated and interesting. Lizzie Hexam is a fascinating character, and Jenny Wren, her friend, the doll's dressmaker, is just incredible, as I have already said. Eugene Wrayburn I love. He's a kind of further development of Sidney Carton from A Tale of Two Cities. He's this careless man who is interested in nothing in life until he finds a woman who he becomes kind of obsessed with, but not necessarily in a creepy way, just in a complicated way that he can't quite understand. He is a fascinating character, and I think really kind of well done, because he is not completely likeable and he is not completely heroic. He is not even always completely respectable, but he is such an interesting character. And then there is Bradley Headstone, who is one of the villains of Our Mutual Friend, who I just think is absolutely brilliant. To me, Bradley Headstone is one of Dickens's few villains that you really, really understand and you really sympathise with him. He is a villain, but he is also kind of a tragic hero in his own right. Watching his kind of descent into madness and into what he ends up doing is just absolutely brilliant. He is just such a fascinating, wonderful, wonderful character, so well drawn. Although he is kind of terrifying at times, the kind of intensity of his character and his changes over the novel are just brilliant. In fact, overall, the whole character development across Our Mutual Friend is really, really well done. The way Lizzie Hexam and Eugene Wrayburn change are brilliant, and Bella Wilfer as well has a fascinating character development over the whole of the novel. She starts off the book very proud, very arrogant, very vain, and the way she progresses and changes over the novel is just lovely. There's also Mr. Venus, who makes his money from buying and selling bones. As you can tell, in Our Mutual Friend, there's quite a lot of themes of people making their money from unusual sources and kind of people making their livelihood from the dregs of society, and that's a really fascinating theme that goes throughout Our Mutual Friend. In fact, there are so many fascinating themes going throughout Our Mutual Friend. A bit like Little Dorrit and Dombey and Son, it is very, very concerned with money and the effect that money can have on people. It's also very, very fascinated with ideas of respectability and being a lady, being a gentleman, what it means to be within society, what it means for the boffins who have been servants all their life to suddenly be elevated into society because they have this fortune, and people kind of flocking to them and pretending to like them and approve of them because they have money, but meanwhile they're kind of saying awful things about them behind their back. That kind of hypocrisy of society and the way it deals with money is really, really fascinating. The kind of greed that money is attracting in Victorian society, Dickens deals with it so interestingly in Our Mutual Friend. I think the plot is so complicated and engaging and just so thoroughly dramatic and fascinating. We have a lot of kind of complex, personal, interweaving relationships, but we also have a lot of drama and intrigue. We have murders, we have disappearances, we have a lot of mysteries, and I love a good mystery, and I love the mysteries in Our Mutual Friend. Admittedly, there are a couple of points where the plot goes a little bit crazy and you're there like, really, Dickens, I don't quite believe you. But because the book is so engaging, you kind of just go with some of the odd mysteries and the odd reveals. You kind of just perfectly accept it because it is such a thoroughly engaging and lovely and fascinating book that you just can't help but adore it, or at least if you're me, you can't. Dickens never has the most realistic plots, and he often has plots that contain a lot of coincidences. Our Mutual Friend definitely is that, and as you can maybe tell from the title, it is a book about mutual friends. There are a lot of characters who know characters who know characters, and a lot of kind of characters who are linked by various other people in a way that I love. You get that in all of Dickens, and that is maybe another reason why I love Our Mutual Friend. It, for me, sums up everything that is the best about Dickens. It sums up his quirky complicatedness, his ability to use these small, weird eccentricities of Victorian society to make a novel. Things like the fact that there were actually people who made their livelihood by dragging dead bodies out of the Thames. Isn't that incredible and fascinating? And it's got the humour, and it's got the tenderness, and it's got the love, it's got the complex personal relationships, the romantic relationships that you really do believe. It's got complexity, it's got deception, it's got an ending that is both happy but also complicated, and at times you have to think, hang on, how are these people going to feel about these events in 5 years' time? You know, it's not just simple and easy. It's got brilliant character development, it's got amazing characters, it has themes of money and greed and deception, it has the mystery, it has the engagement, it has complicated characters who change over the course of the novel, it has people standing up for what they believe in and people standing up against villainy. It has villains who are complicated and quirky, but you do kind of believe in. It has, for me, everything that is the best about Dickens. That is why I love Our Mutual Friend, because everything I love about Dickens is encapsulated in this brilliant, brilliant book. It is, for me, the culmination of his books. I think it is the best, maybe, I don't know. It is so, so good, so brilliant, so powerful. I just love it. I want everyone to read it. I love that it is quirky and yet beautiful. I love that it is eccentric yet believable. I love that it deals with characters who are both horrible but also lovable. And I love that it has complicated, interesting female characters who are not defined by the fact that they are women, and that it has male characters who are emotional, who are not defined by the fact that they are men. One of the reasons why Bradley Headstone kind of goes mad is because he has been bound up tightly in Victorian male respectability, and the moment he lets that kind of guard slip, he just goes completely wild. I love that it explores ideas of morality, ideas of class. I love its comments on society. I love everything about it. It's just my favourite book. Have you got that yet? I feel like I could sit here and talk about why I love Our Mutual Friend for a very long time. I hope you have got a sense of what the book is like and part of the reasons why I love it. It is a very complicated, interweaving narrative with a lot of characters, but I think it is beautiful. I think it is powerful. I think it is brilliant. I think it is fascinating. And there are so many brilliant things about this book I haven't even touched on. For example, Bella's relationship with her father, or the character of Fascination Fledgeby, or the character of Georgiana Potsnap, and the Lamleys, and how their loveless marriage, based entirely on the belief that each other had a lot of money, which they soon find out was not the case, how that kind of binds them and together and tears them apart. The way Our Mutual Friend deals with the complexities of marriage as a Victorian institution, the way it deals with money and wills and what it means to be a person in Victorian society, just everything. It is so good. Quickly, before my camera runs out of battery, I just have time to tell you about this brilliant TV adaptation of Our Mutual Friend from 1998. I think it is really good. It's not completely truthful to the book, and they have to miss a lot out, as always happens, especially when they're trying to do a massive book in 6 hours, but it is a really good adaptation. I think the presentations of the characters are brilliant, and David Morrissey as Bradley Headstone is absolutely perfect. He gets it spot on, and there are so many brilliant performances in this. I think it's all done really well. Another like small detail I really love in this, in like all the society scenes, everything looks really bright, and then when you get to the scenes by the Thames, suddenly everything looks like really dark whenever we're dealing with the characters who are struggling with poverty. I think that's a really like clever, nice device of it. I saw this before I read the book. It didn't spoil the book for me. I still adore the book. I would recommend reading the book first, but once you have read the book, I do recommend this. I think it's really brilliant. One of my favourite TV adaptations of all time, and it got me into Dickens, so obviously it has a very high sentimental place in my heart as well. So all in all, I love Our Mutual Friend. Please read it, people. Please do. It is my favourite novel of all time. I cannot recommend it enough. I love it, as this video will have been proof. I love it so much. I think it is beautiful and incredible. I'm going to leave you with that. Please let me know if you have enjoyed What the Dickens and what Dickens book you are now the most curious to read. I'm genuinely really interested to hear which Dickens novel has maybe piqued your interest and what you have thought of this series. I will be back tomorrow with a video that will not be about Dickens. In the meantime, happy reading. Happy birthday, Dickens.